June 19, 1944, 250 miles west of Guam, Philippine Sea. The radar screens light up. Over 400 Japanese aircraft are inbound, the largest carrier strike force since Pearl Harbor. On the decks of American carriers, pilots sprint to their fighters. Within minutes, waves of blue aircraft launch into the tropical sky. These are Grumman F6F Hellcats. And in the next 48 hours, they will shoot down nearly 400 enemy aircraft while losing only 30 of their own. In this documentary, you'll discover the complete story of the F6F Hellcat, from its urgent development in the dark days after Pearl Harbor to its legendary combat record that shattered every naval aviation record in history. This is a story of innovation, courage, and the machine that won the air war in the Pacific. But before we dive in, let me ask you this. What if I told you that one aircraft type was responsible for destroying more enemy planes than any other fighter in World War II? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why the F6F Hellcat is considered the deadliest fighter aircraft ever built, with a kill ratio of 19-1 and over 5,000 enemy aircraft destroyed. Think about that for a moment. For every Hellcat lost in combat, 19 enemy aircraft were shot down. No fighter in history before or since has matched that record. Not the Spitfire, not the P-51 Mustang, not the Messerschmitt 109. The Hellcat stands alone. And if you're a fan of WWII aviation history, hit that subscribe button. We're covering every legendary warbird from the greatest conflict in history. But here's where it gets interesting. The Hellcat wasn't supposed to be the war winner. When it entered service in 1943, the Japanese Zero had been dominating Pacific skies for 2 years. American pilots were flying inferior aircraft, taking massive casualties and losing critical battles. The Navy desperately needed a fighter that could turn the tide. They needed it fast, and they needed it to work the first time. Grumman aircraft delivered exactly that. The F6F Hellcat was designed with one purpose: kill Zeros. Every decision, every design choice, every technical specification focused on that single mission. More powerful engine, heavier armor, better climb rate, superior high-altitude performance. The Hellcat was built to hunt. What happened next shocked everyone involved. From its first combat mission in August 1943 to the war's end in August 1945, Hellcats flew over 66,000 combat sorties. They shot down 5,163 enemy aircraft in air-to-air combat. They destroyed another 3,000 on the ground. They provided air cover for every major amphibious landing from Tarawa to Okinawa. They hunted Japanese shipping. They struck ground targets. And they dominated the skies so completely that by 1945, Japanese pilots avoided combat whenever Hellcats appeared. The numbers tell an incredible story, but the real story was just beginning. This aircraft would participate in the largest carrier battles in history. It would be flown by legendary aces who racked up dozens of kills. It would prove so effective that it remained in frontline service even as jets entered the war. And it would cement Grumman's reputation as the builder of the Navy's most lethal fighters. This is the story of how one aircraft changed the course of the Pacific War. To understand the F6F Hellcat, we need to go back to December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor burns. The Pacific Fleet lies shattered. And in the skies above, Japanese Zeros demonstrate a level of performance that shocks American military planners. The Zero could outturn, outclimb, and outrange every fighter in the American arsenal. It was faster than the F-4F Wildcat, more maneuverable than the P-40 Warhawk. Its 20mm cannons hit harder than American .50 caliber machine guns. And Japanese pilots had years of combat experience over China, making them among the most skilled aviators in the world. American carrier pilots flew the F-4F Wildcat, a stubby fighter that was tough and reliable but completely outclassed by the Zero. In the early battles of 1942, Wildcats took horrific losses. At the Battle of the Coral Sea, American fighters struggled to intercept Japanese bombers. At Midway, Wildcat squadrons were decimated trying to defend the fleet. The kill ratio was barely 1-1, and American pilots were dying. The problem was clear. Without air superiority, the Navy couldn't protect its carriers. Without protected carriers, amphibious invasions were impossible. Without invasions, there was no path to defeating Japan. The entire Pacific strategy depended on winning the air war, and in mid-1942, America was losing that war badly. But here's what made the situation desperate. Japanese industry was producing Zeros faster than America could shoot them down. Japanese pilot training was producing skilled aviators, and Japanese tactical doctrine emphasized aggressive, offensive fighter operations. American pilots were brave, but bravery couldn't overcome a 50 mph speed disadvantage and half the climb rate. Navy leadership understood the stakes. Admiral John McCain, commander of carrier air forces, sent urgent messages to Washington. His pilots needed a better aircraft immediately, not in 2 years, not after extensive testing. Now, the message was clear: give us a fighter that can beat the Zero or we will lose the Pacific. Grumman Aircraft had already begun preliminary work on a Wildcat successor before Pearl Harbor. But the attack transformed the project from a routine upgrade into a life-or-death emergency. The specifications were brutal. The new fighter had to be faster than the Zero. It had to climb faster. It needed heavier armament, better armor protection, longer range, greater payload capacity for bombs and rockets, and it had to operate from carrier decks with minimal training for new pilots. These requirements seemed contradictory. More speed meant more weight, more armor meant less performance. Better armament meant structural redesign. Longer range meant bigger fuel tanks and even more weight. Traditional design philosophy said you couldn't have everything. You had to choose between speed, protection, and firepower. The Japanese had chosen speed and maneuverability, sacrificing protection. American pilots were paying for that choice with their lives every day. Grumman's engineers knew they had to find a different answer. But the solution would come from an unexpected place: a design philosophy that rejected the Zero's approach entirely and built a fighter around raw power and pilot survivability. Enter Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation. On Long Island, New York, Chief Engineer William Schwendler assembled his team with a clear mission: build a fighter that Navy pilots could trust with their lives. Grumman had already earned a reputation for tough, reliable aircraft. Now they would prove that toughness could win wars. Schwendler's philosophy was radical for its time. Instead of trying to outmaneuver the Zero, the Hellcat would overpower it. Instead of building a lightweight dogfighter, Grumman would create a heavily armed and armored fighter that could absorb punishment and keep flying. Instead of demanding ace-level skill, the design would be forgiving enough for newly trained pilots to master quickly. The breakthrough came with the engine choice. Grumman selected the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, the most powerful radial engine in production. This massive 18-cylinder engine produced 2,000 horsepower, 50% more than the Zero's powerplant. That extra power would compensate for increased weight and deliver performance the Japanese couldn't match. But here's where things got complicated. The R2800 was enormous. It required a larger fuselage, more cooling airflow, stronger landing gear to handle the extra weight. The design grew rapidly, and with it came concerns. Could such a heavy fighter operate from carrier decks? Would it be too sluggish in combat? Was Grumman building a powerful aircraft that pilots couldn't effectively use? The design team made calculated decisions. They positioned the engine low in the fuselage, improving visibility over the nose. They designed wide-track landing gear that made carrier landings more stable and forgiving. They incorporated lessons from combat reports flooding back from the Pacific armor behind the pilot, self-sealing fuel tanks, redundant control systems. The armament package was devastating. 6.50 caliber machine guns, 3 in each wing, with 400 rounds per gun. That was 2,400 rounds of ammunition, enough for extended combat without the need to conserve shots. Later versions would mount rockets and bombs for ground attack missions. The Hellcat would be a multi-role fighter from day one. Stay with me because this next part is crucial. While Grumman designed the airframe, they worked directly with Navy pilots who had combat experience against the Zero. These pilots provided invaluable input. They wanted a fighter that could dive away from trouble. The Hellcat's robust structure allowed terminal velocity dives that would tear a Zero apart. They wanted visibility. The bubble canopy provided excellent sightlines. They wanted survivability. The armor and redundant systems meant pilots could bring damaged aircraft home. The prototype, designated XF6F1, began taking shape in late 1941. Workers at Grumman's Bethpage facility worked around the clock. The aircraft was larger than the Wildcat, with a wingspan of 42 feet and length of 33 feet. Empty weight came in at 9,238 pounds, nearly twice the Zero's weight. But that weight bought capability. On June 26, 1942, test pilot Robert Hall took the XF-6F prototype into the air for the first time. The flight lasted 29 minutes. Hall reported excellent handling characteristics, good visibility, and impressive power. But the real revelation came during performance testing. The Hellcat could reach 375 mph at 17,300 feet. It could climb to 20,000 feet in 7.7 minutes. And it could sustain high-G maneuvers that would black out most pilots before the aircraft reached its structural limits. The Navy was impressed, but they wanted more. More speed, more climb rate, better high-altitude performance. Grumman responded by installing the more powerful R2810 engine with water injection, boosting output to 2,200 horsepower. This modification transformed the Hellcat from impressive to exceptional. Production orders came before testing was complete. The Navy couldn't wait. They needed Hellcats in combat by mid-1943, which meant production had to begin immediately. Grumman committed to building 2,545 aircraft in the first year alone. It was an unprecedented gamble, mass-producing an aircraft still undergoing trials. However, what happened during the first test flight would shock everyone involved. The first F6F3 production model took to the skies on October 3, 1942. Test pilots reported something unexpected. The Hellcat wasn't just good, it was exceptional. The handling was smooth and predictable. The controls were responsive without being twitchy. And most importantly, average pilots could fly it effectively after minimal training time. But here's where it gets interesting. The Navy sent the Hellcat to face its ultimate test, simulated combat against a captured Zero. At the Naval Air Station in San Diego, American test pilots flew mock dogfights, comparing the two fighters directly. The results validated everything Grumman had designed. The Hellcat couldn't turn with the Zero, that was accepted. But it didn't need to. The Hellcat was 50 mph faster in level flight. It could outdive the Zero by a massive margin. Its roll rate at high speeds was superior, and critically it could absorb battle damage that would destroy a Zero. American pilots developed new tactics based on these advantages: use speed and altitude, make one high-speed pass, then zoom away before the Zero could respond. The Navy called this boom and zoom tactics, and it would revolutionize Pacific air combat. But the Hellcat needed modifications before it was ready for war. Engineers discovered that the oil cooler positioning caused overheating during prolonged climbs. They redesigned the cowling and air intakes. Pilots complained about limited rearward visibility. Grumman raised the pilot's seat and improved the canopy design. Carrier qualification trials began in early 1943. This was the ultimate test. Could this heavy, powerful fighter actually operate from carrier decks in combat conditions? The trials took place aboard USS Essex, the newest fleet carrier. Pilots performed hundreds of takeoffs and landings. They tested the aircraft in various sea states, wind conditions, and loading configurations. The results exceeded expectations. The Hellcat's wide-track landing gear made it remarkably stable during carrier landings. The powerful engine provided excellent acceleration for takeoffs, even with full fuel and ammunition loads. The aircraft could operate in conditions that grounded earlier fighters. Deck crews found it easy to maintain, with most systems accessible without extensive disassembly. What happened next shocked everyone. The Navy accelerated production schedules. Grumman's Bethpage plant was expanded. A second production line opened at General Motors' Eastern Aircraft Division in Trenton, New Jersey. By mid-1943, Hellcats were rolling off assembly lines at a rate of over 500 per month. It was the fastest fighter production ramp-up in history. Training squadrons received their Hellcats in spring 1943. Instructors reported that new pilots were soloing in the aircraft after just 10 hours of flight time. The Hellcat's forgiving handling characteristics meant fewer training accidents and faster pilot production. This was critical. The Navy needed thousands of trained fighter pilots for the massive carrier offensive planned for late 1943. Meanwhile, combat veterans from the Pacific were rotated back to the United States to provide input on tactics and training. These pilots had faced Zeros and Wildcats. Now they would train the next generation in Hellcats. Their message was consistent: this aircraft will change everything. Use your speed. Use your firepower. Use your armor. Don't try to dogfight. Make one pass, kill your target, and escape before other enemies can respond. By July 1943, the first Hellcat squadrons were declared combat-ready. VF-5 and VF-9 received their aircraft and began intensive training for carrier operations. The pilots were confident. The aircraft performed exactly as promised, and intelligence reports indicated the Japanese had no idea what was about to hit them. But its real test was about to come in actual combat. August 31, 1943, Marcus Island, a tiny Japanese-held atoll 1,000 miles northwest of Wake Island. At dawn, USS Essex and USS Yorktown launched their air groups for the first carrier strike of the Central Pacific Offensive. Leading the fighter escort were F6F Hellcats of VF-5 and VF-9. This would be their baptism by fire. The strike package consisted of bombers and torpedo planes targeting Japanese installations, with Hellcats providing high cover at 15,000 feet. As the formation approached Marcus Island, Japanese radar detected the incoming attack. Zero fighters scrambled from the small airstrip, climbing to intercept. Lieutenant Commander Edward Butch O'Hare, already a Medal of Honor recipient from his Wildcat days, led VF-6's Hellcats into their first engagement. He spotted a formation of Zeros climbing toward the bombers. The tactical situation was exactly what Grumman had designed for. The Hellcats had altitude advantage, they had speed advantage, and they had the firepower to make one pass count. O'Hare rolled his Hellcat into a diving attack. The airspeed indicator climbed rapidly as gravity and 2,200 horsepower combined. At 400 mph, he closed on the lead Zero before the Japanese pilot even saw him. The 6.50 caliber machine guns erupted. The Zero disintegrated under the concentrated fire. O'Hare pulled up, climbed back to altitude using the Hellcat's superior power, and prepared for another attack. What happened next validated every design decision. Hellcat pilots executed the boom and zoom tactics perfectly. Dive at high speed, one firing pass, zoom back to altitude before the Zeros could respond. The Japanese pilots tried to engage in turning fights, but the Hellcats refused. They maintained speed and altitude advantage, dictating the terms of engagement. In 20 minutes of combat, Hellcats shot down 11 Japanese aircraft without a single loss. The pilots reported that the aircraft performed exactly as advertised. The guns were devastating. The armor stopped rounds that would have been fatal in a Wildcat. The speed differential made it nearly impossible for Zeros to catch them in a dive. But you won't believe what happened during the next major operation. On September 1st, the carriers launched a second strike against Marcus Island. This time, Japanese defenders were ready. More fighters scrambled. Anti-aircraft fire was intense. The Hellcats faced a coordinated defense designed to overwhelm attackers. The results were even more lopsided. VF-5 claimed 14 kills. VF-9 added another 8. Combined losses, 0 Hellcats. The Japanese defenders were decimated. Their tactics, perfected against Wildcats over 2 years of war, were useless against this new aircraft. The speed differential meant Zeros couldn't force engagements. The firepower meant one burst was usually fatal. And the armor meant lucky shots that should have downed American fighters merely damaged them. Admiral Charles Pownall, commanding the carrier task force, sent an immediate report to Pacific Fleet headquarters. The F6F Hellcat was everything the Navy needed. Production should be maximized immediately. Every carrier fighter squadron should convert to Hellcats as quickly as possible. The air superiority battle in the Pacific was about to shift dramatically in America's favor. Pilots who flew both the Wildcat and Hellcat called the difference night and day. Ensign Robert Duncan wrote in his diary, "The Zero is no longer king. We have speed, we have firepower, and we have protection. For the first time, I feel like we're hunting them instead of being hunted." The Marcus Island raids were just the opening act. Over the next 3 months, Hellcats would participate in strikes against Wake Island, Rabaul, and Tarawa. Each engagement reinforced the same conclusion: Japanese air power was no longer superior. This was just the beginning. What came next would cement its legendary status. By June 1944, the F6F Hellcat was at the height of its power. 15 carrier air groups operated Hellcats exclusively. Over 2,000 of these fighters were in the Pacific Theater, and American carrier task forces were preparing for the largest naval operation since midway the invasion of Saipan in the Mariana Islands. The Japanese understood what was at stake. Saipan was only 1,500 miles from Tokyo. Its loss would bring B-29 bombers within range of the Japanese homeland. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa assembled the largest carrier strike force Japan could muster 9 carriers with 430 aircraft. His plan was simple: launch massive strikes that would overwhelm American defenses through sheer numbers. Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher commanded Task Force 58, the American Fast Carrier Force. His 15 carriers embarked over 900 aircraft, with nearly 500 Hellcats providing fighter cover. Mitcher's pilots were confident. They had been hunting Japanese aircraft for nearly a year. The kill ratio was running at 13-1 in their favor, but no one had faced 400 enemy aircraft in a single engagement. June 19, 1944. The Battle of the Philippine Sea began at 1,000 hours when American radar detected massive Japanese formations inbound from the west. The range was 150 miles and closing. Mitcher's air operations officer calculated the numbers: over 400 enemy aircraft. This would be the largest carrier battle in history. The order went out across the fleet: launch everything. Within 30 minutes, over 300 Hellcats were airborne, forming defensive screens at various altitudes. The Japanese came in 4 massive waves, each with 60 to 100 aircraft. They expected to overwhelm the defenders. They were about to face a coordinated defense that Japanese planners couldn't have imagined. The first wave hit the American fighters at 10:36 hours, 60 miles from the carriers. Commander David McCampbell, leading VF-15 from USS Essex, positioned his Hellcats with perfect altitude advantage. He dove into the Japanese formation, his wingmen following in textbook formation. 6.50 caliber guns raked a Judy dive bomber. It exploded. McCampbell pulled up, selected another target, fired. Another kill. What happened next was systematic destruction. Hellcat pilots executed their tactics with brutal efficiency. High-speed diving attacks. One pass, one kill. Zoom back to altitude. Repeat. The Japanese formations disintegrated under the coordinated assault. Zeros that tried to engage in dogfights found themselves outrun and outgunned. Bombers attempting to break through were torn apart by concentrated fire. Stay with me because this next part is crucial. The second wave arrived at 11:07 hours. Same result. Hellcats ripped through the formation. The third wave at 1300 hours never even reached the carriers. And the fourth wave, launched late in the afternoon, lost 73 of its 82 aircraft. American pilots later called it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, because shooting down Japanese aircraft had become that easy. By sunset, the carnage was complete. The Japanese lost 330 aircraft in combat, plus another 50 operational losses. American losses: 30 aircraft with many pilots rescued. The kill ratio was 11-1. 3 Japanese carriers were sunk by submarines during the battle. Ozawa's carrier force was shattered. Japan's naval air power would never recover. Commander McCampbell alone shot down 9 aircraft in multiple engagements throughout the day, including 7 in one 8-minute engagement. Ensign Wilbur, Spider, Webb of VF-2 shot down 6. Lieutenant Alexander Vrasiu of VF-16 destroyed 6 aircraft in one 8-minute span. These weren't aces having good luck. These were well-trained pilots flying superior aircraft executing perfect tactics. But every legend has its darkest moment. Despite its success, the F6F Hellcat wasn't invincible. The aircraft had limitations that became apparent as the war progressed and Japanese tactics evolved. Understanding these weaknesses is crucial to understanding why pilots respected, rather than romanticized, their aircraft. The Hellcat's greatest strength, its weight and armor, was also its weakness. At 12,000 pounds fully loaded, it was heavy for a single-engine fighter. This meant sluggish performance at low speeds and altitudes. Japanese fighters could outturn the Hellcat at any speed. In a slow-speed turning fight, a skilled Zero pilot could eventually get on a Hellcat's tail. Discipline was everything. Pilots who forgot their training and tried to dogfight often paid with their lives. Kamikazes presented a different challenge entirely. By late 1944, Japanese pilots were deliberately crashing explosive-laden aircraft into American ships. Hellcats had to intercept these suicide attackers before they reached the fleet. But shooting down a kamikaze didn't always stop it. Damaged aircraft would continue flying, sometimes reaching their targets despite catastrophic damage. Hellcat pilots learned to aim for the engine or pilot, trying to disable the aircraft completely. The statistics were sobering. During the Battle of Okinawa from April to June 1945, kamikazes sank 36 American ships and damaged 368 others. Hellcats shot down hundreds of attackers, but some always got through. The psychological toll on pilots was immense. They could win every engagement and still watch ships burn. Range limitations became apparent during the Philippine campaign. The Hellcat's combat radius was approximately 945 miles with drop tanks. This was excellent for carrier operations, but insufficient for some long-range strikes. Pilots operating at maximum range had no fuel margin for extended combat. Several Hellcats were lost not to enemy action, but to fuel exhaustion after long missions. Night operations revealed another vulnerability. The Hellcat's cockpit lighting was inadequate for instrument flying in complete darkness. Early radar-equipped night fighter variants suffered from equipment reliability issues. Japanese night bombers occasionally penetrated carrier defenses because night-fighting Hellcats couldn't locate them in time. And then there were the losses that hurt most operational accidents. Carrier landings at night, in bad weather, or with battle damage were inherently dangerous. Over 270 Hellcats were lost to operational causes. Young pilots with minimal training sometimes made fatal mistakes. The aircraft was forgiving, but it couldn't overcome pilot error in all circumstances. Yet one mission would prove why this aircraft earned its place in history. October 24, 1944. The Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in history. Commander David McCampbell, already an ace with 21 confirmed kills, launched from USS Essex with his wingman, Ensign Roy Rushing. Their mission: provide combat air patrol over the American invasion fleet at Leyte. At 8:50 hours, McCampbell's radar intercept officer reported a massive bogey formation 60 miles northwest. McCampbell turned to investigate, climbing to 25,000 feet. What he saw made his heart sink. Over 60 Japanese aircraft fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo planes heading directly for the vulnerable transport ships unloading troops on the beaches. McCampbell faced an impossible decision. He had 2 Hellcats against 60 enemy aircraft. Standard procedure was to call for reinforcements and shadow the formation until help arrived. But help was 20 minutes away. In 20 minutes, those 60 aircraft would be over the fleet, dropping bombs and torpedoes on ships packed with American soldiers. He made his choice: attack. McCampbell keyed his radio. "Roy, we're going in. Stay with me. Make every shot count." He rolled his Hellcat into a steep dive, building speed to over 400 mph. The Japanese formation was flying in loose groups, confident they faced minimal opposition. They were about to learn otherwise. McCampbell selected the rear fighter element, 4 Zeros flying as tail-end protection. He closed to 300 feet before firing. His 6.50 caliber guns converged on the lead Zero. The Japanese fighter exploded. McCampbell immediately shifted aim to the second Zero. Another burst. Another kill. The remaining 2 Zeros broke formation in panic, splitting away from the main group. But here's where it gets interesting. Instead of breaking off, McCampbell climbed back into position and attacked again. And again. And again. For the next 90 minutes, he and Rushing harassed the Japanese formation continuously. They couldn't stop all 60 aircraft, but they could disrupt them, scatter them, force them to jettison ordnance, and take evasive action. McCampbell's tactics were brilliant. He attacked the bombers primarily, forcing them to drop their ordnance early or turn away. He avoided prolonged dogfights with fighters, using hit-and-run tactics that the Hellcat excelled at. When his ammunition began running low, he made dry passes, causing Japanese pilots to break formation even though he wasn't firing. The Japanese formation disintegrated. Some aircraft turned back, others scattered across the sky. A few pressed on toward the fleet, but in such small numbers that defending anti-aircraft fire destroyed them. The coordinated mass attack that should have devastated the amphibious force never materialized. When McCampbell finally landed back on Essex, his fuel tanks were nearly empty. His ammunition was completely expended. He had fired 2,400 rounds. His gun camera footage confirmed 9 kills, making him the Navy's top ace in a single mission. Rushing had shot down 6 more. 2 Hellcats had stopped a formation of 60 aircraft, not through luck, through superior aircraft performance, superior tactics, and extraordinary courage. As the war progressed, the F6F Hellcat would continue to evolve. By 1945, warfare was changing rapidly, and the Hellcat evolved to meet new demands. The aircraft that had been designed purely as an air superiority fighter now performed roles its designers never envisioned. This adaptability would prove crucial in the war's final months. The F6F5 variant entered service in early 1944 with numerous improvements. A more powerful R2810W engine with water injection boosted emergency power to 2,200 horsepower. The cockpit was redesigned with better armor and an improved windscreen. Spring-loaded aileron tabs improved roll rate at high speeds. These modifications kept the Hellcat competitive even as new Japanese fighters like the Kawanishi N1K entered service. Night fighting became increasingly important as Japanese air attacks shifted to darkness. The F6F5 and night fighter variant carried AN/APS-6 radar in a pod on the starboard wing. Lieutenant Commander William Henry, flying a radar-equipped Hellcat, became the Navy's top night fighter ace with 7 kills. Night Hellcats protected the fleet during the Okinawa campaign, shooting down dozens of kamikaze attackers in darkness. Ground attack capabilities expanded dramatically. Hellcats began carrying rockets, bombs, and napalm for close air support missions. During the Philippines campaign, Hellcat pilots discovered they could destroy Japanese armor and fortifications with 5-inch rockets. The aircraft proved remarkably stable as a dive bomber, with pilots reporting accurate weapons delivery even in heavy anti-aircraft fire. The F6F5P FOD reconnaissance variant removed 2 guns and installed cameras for tactical reconnaissance. These aircraft photographed invasion beaches, mapped Japanese defenses, and provided bomb damage assessment. Photo Hellcats flew alone and unarmed, relying on speed and altitude to survive. They rarely lost aircraft, testament to the Hellcat's rugged design and excellent performance. Production numbers tell the story of American industrial dominance. By war's end, Grumman and General Motors had produced 12,275 Hellcats. At peak production in 1944, factories delivered over 500 aircraft per month. This mass production meant every carrier air group could be fully equipped, with spare aircraft available for rapid replacement of combat losses. But here's what made the Hellcat truly revolutionary: its maintainability. Carrier maintenance crews could change an engine in 4 hours. Most repairs required only basic tools. The aircraft systems were robust and reliable, with mechanical failure rates far lower than other fighters. This operational reliability meant more aircraft available for combat missions and fewer losses to mechanical problems. Foreign nations recognized the Hellcat's value. Britain's Fleet Air Arm received 1,263 Hellcats under Lend-Lease, operating them as the Gannet. British Hellcats fought in the Pacific alongside American carriers and provided fleet defense in the Indian Ocean. The French Navy received Hellcats post-war, using them into the 1950s. By August 1945, Hellcats equipped every American carrier fighter squadron in the Pacific. They had achieved absolute air superiority. Japanese pilots avoided combat whenever possible. The few remaining experienced enemy aviators called engaging Hellcats suicide missions. And then came the moment that would define its legacy. When the war ended on August 15, 1945, the F6F Hellcat had compiled a combat record unmatched in aviation history. In just 2 years of frontline service, Hellcats flew 66,530 combat sorties. They destroyed 5,163 enemy aircraft in air-to-air combat. They shot down an additional 209 aircraft by strafing airfields. The final kill ratio, 19-1. For every Hellcat lost in combat, 19 enemy aircraft were destroyed. These numbers represent more than statistics. They represent air supremacy so complete that American carriers operated with near impunity in Japanese waters. They represent thousands of bomber and torpedo crews who completed their missions because Hellcats cleared the skies. They represent amphibious invasions that succeeded because air cover was absolute. But the Hellcat service didn't end in 1945. The aircraft remained in frontline service with reserve squadrons through 1954. When the Korean War began in 1950, some reserve units still flew Hellcats, though they were quickly replaced by jets. The transition from propeller fighters to jets happened rapidly, but the Hellcat had proven the concepts that guided jet fighter designed: speed, firepower, and ruggedness over maneuverability. Foreign operators continued flying Hellcats well into the 1960s. Argentina's Navy operated Hellcats until 1961. Uruguay flew them into the late 1950s. France used Hellcats during the First Indochina War, flying ground attack missions against Viet Minh forces. These export Hellcats accumulated thousands of additional combat hours, proving the design's longevity. The Hellcat produced 307 aces pilots with 5 or more confirmed kills. Commander David McCampbell finished the war as the Navy's top ace with 34 kills, all in Hellcats. Lieutenant Cecil Harris shot down 24 aircraft. Ensign Douglas Baker claimed 16.5 kills. These weren't superhuman pilots flying perfect missions. They were well-trained aviators in aircraft that gave them every advantage. Today, approximately 150 Hellcats survive in museums and private collections worldwide. 7 remain airworthy, regularly flying at airshows and commemorative events. The sound of a Pratt & Whitney R2800 at full power still stops crowds. Veterans who flew Hellcats often return to these airshows, sharing stories with younger generations. The aircraft at the National Museum of Naval Aviation in Pensacola, Florida, is painted in the markings of VF-27, the squadron that achieved the highest kill ratio of the war. It stands as a memorial to every pilot who flew Hellcats and every sailor who maintained them. Looking back, the F6F Hellcat was more than just a machine. It was the weapon that broke Japanese air power and made victory in the Pacific possible. Without the Hellcat, the island-hopping campaign would have been slower, bloodier, and far more costly in American lives. The technological innovations pioneered by the Hellcat became foundational principles for all future fighter design. The emphasis on pilot survivability over pure performance changed how militaries designed combat aircraft. Armor protection, self-sealing fuel tanks, and redundant systems became standard features. The concept that a heavier, more powerful aircraft could dominate through superior tactics rather than dogfighting ability revolutionized fighter doctrine. The Hellcat proved that mass production of complex military equipment was possible without sacrificing quality. The 12,275 aircraft built maintained consistent performance and reliability across the entire production run. This manufacturing achievement set the template for post-war American military procurement, demonstrating that quantity and quality weren't mutually exclusive. More importantly, the Hellcat gave American carrier pilots absolute confidence. They knew their aircraft was superior. They knew their tactics were proven. They knew they could engage any enemy fighter and win. That psychological advantage was as important as the technical specifications. Confidence breeds aggression, and aggressive fighter pilots win battles. The 19-to-1 kill ratio speaks for itself. No other fighter in history has matched that record in sustained combat operations. Not in World War II, not in Korea, not in Vietnam. The F6F Hellcat stands alone as the most effective air superiority fighter ever built, measured by the only statistic that truly matters: enemy aircraft destroyed versus friendly losses. The Hellcat didn't just win the air war in the Pacific. It defined what victory in the air meant: complete dominance, overwhelming firepower, and pilots who returned home alive. So there you have it, the complete story of the F6F Hellcat, the plane that shot down more than 5,000 enemy aircraft. From its urgent development after Pearl Harbor to its total dominance at the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, this aircraft proved that superior engineering, smart tactics, and brave pilots could change the course of history. 12,275 Hellcats were built, flying 66,530 combat missions, and achieving a kill ratio of 19-to-1. It destroyed more enemy aircraft than any other fighter in World War II. It produced 307 aces. It gave American carrier pilots the tool they needed to win the Pacific War. It remains the deadliest naval fighter ever built. What impressed you most about this legendary warbird? Was it the incredible 19-to-1 kill ratio, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, or Commander McCampbell's incredible 9-kill mission? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to see more deep dives into WWII's greatest aircraft, subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're covering the P-51 Mustang, the B-17 Flying Fortress, the Corsair, and every other legendary aircraft from the greatest conflict in history. Thanks for watching WWII Aviation, and I'll see you in the next one.